Imagine having the absolute victory of your cause just handed to you on a silver platter.
Right.
I mean, everything you and your people have fought for, bled for, died for over decades is finally right there on the table.
Yeah, exactly.
You're offered recognition of your historical lands, absolute safety for your people, and, the uniting of your provinces. You get literally everything short of total independent separation.
Which is a massive win.
It's a huge win. But instead of taking that victory, you reject it.
Mm-hmm.
And you reject it so violently and with such a profound lack of long-term vision
Yeah.
that you end up entirely vanquished.
Right. Destroying your own movement.
Yeah, destroying the movement and all the gains you had secured for your community in the process. It's crazy.
It sounds like a geopolitical tragedy, but that is exactly what happened with the LTTE in Sri Lanka following the Indo-Sri Lanka Peace Accord.
Wow.
Yeah, it's one of the most sobering examples in modern history of how a total refusal to compromise can transform you into the very instrument of your own destruction.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are not just looking at dates and battles. We're taking a massive, meticulous magnifying glass to over 70 years of India's experience with insurgencies, terrorism, proxy wars, and left-wing extremism.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. If you are listening to this, you are stepping into the war room. We're going to distill decades of blood, sweat, and strategic evolution into a single, high-retention audio masterclass.
And I'm here to guide you through this. As a strategic affairs scholar and military historian, my focus isn't just on what happened on the battlefield.
Right.
We need to look at the underlying systems, the invisible, often really messy machinery that makes states succeed or fail when their very survival is on the line.
Because it's never just simple, is it?
Oh, not at all. Complex security challenges are incredibly murky. You are dealing with human psychology, historical grievances, geography, and geopolitics all colliding at exactly the same time.
Which brings us to the central question for our entire deep dive today. And I want you, the listener, to keep this question echoing in the back of your mind for the next hour or so.
It's the anchor for everything.
Exactly. The question is, what enduring lessons decide success or failure in complex security challenges?
And to answer that, we have to start with a foundational framework because it's a really common misconception that long-term success in a highly volatile security environment is just about having the biggest guns, right? Or the fastest jets or the most troops.
Yeah, the Hollywood version of war.
Exactly. But it isn't. Long-term success actually requires the perfect synchronized alignment of 5 distinct elements.
Okay, let's hear them.
They are political aim, diplomacy, security approach, governance, and population support.
So political aim, diplomacy, security approach, governance, and population support.
Right. If even one of those 5 pillars is out of alignment, the entire structure eventually just collapses under its own weight.
Okay, so if we were to translate that into a master formula, an audio equation, for you listening to lock into your memory, right now it looks like this.
Go ahead.
Clear aim plus unity of effort plus legitimacy plus cageability plus adaptability equals strategic success.
That's the one.
Let me repeat that, because literally everything we discussed today hangs on this. Clear aim plus unity of effort plus legitimacy plus capability plus adaptability equals strategic success.
Precisely. And it's important to view this as an equation of multiplication, not addition.
Wait, what do you mean by that?
Well, if any of those variables drops to 0, say, you have a massive capability but 0 legitimacy with the population, the final product is 0.
Oh, I see. Anything multiplied by 0 is 0.
Exactly. Total strategic failure.
Right. But, knowing an equation exists is completely useless if you don't know how to apply it in the real world.
Very true.
You can't just write legitimacy on a chalkboard
Yeah.
and expect an insurgency to magically end. So let's get into the mechanics of this, starting with the first and most critical variable, the political anchor.
Yes, section 1.
Because you cannot solve a military problem without a political foundation. A military without a political compass is, well, it's just force without direction.
Course without direction. That is exactly the trap so many nations fall into. Let's look at this through the lens of political direction and clear objectives.
Okay.
Historically, the recurring problem we see is states entering into conflicts with completely unclear or shifting political aims.
Right.
And the immediate result of that on the ground is just total operational confusion.
Why does that happen, though? I mean, if a government is going to the extreme length of deploying its military, why wouldn't they just say exactly what they want to achieve? It seems so
It
obvious.
seems obvious from the outside, sure. But you have to understand the mechanics of politics. Politics thrives on compromise, negotiation, and, frankly, deliberate ambiguity.
Right. Politicians want to keep their options open.
Exactly. But the military cannot operate on ambiguity. When governments fail to define the absolute end state of a conflict, the military forces deployed are forced to interpret that political ambiguity themselves.
Oh, wow. So they're just guessing.
Pretty much. The generals and the soldiers are left guessing what the politicians actually want. And this leads to a massive dissipation of effort.
Give me an example of what that looks like on the ground.
Well, you have troops securing villages without knowing if they are supposed to hold them forever or hand them over to local police or wait for some treaty to be signed.
So they're stuck in limbo, which means the corrective principle here must be crystal clear articulation of the end state.
Exactly. The government must spell out its aims with total clarity. We saw a stark validation of this principle when the Sri Lankan government finally brought an end to its decades-long insurgencies.
Right, after years of back and forth.
Right. After years of shifting strategies, they finally defined the exact political and military end state they required. There was no more ambiguity. The military knew exactly what the finish line looked like.
So applying this to the future is rigorous but simple. Every single future deployment requires a defined political end state before a single soldier even moves out of the barracks.
Absolutely non-negotiable.
If I can use an analogy here, deploying a military without a clear political aim is like hiring an elite crew of carpenters to build a house, but refusing to give them a blueprint.
That's a great way to put it.
Right, like they have the best tools, they are highly skilled, but because they don't know if they are building a two-story mansion or a one-room shed, they're going to build a chaotic structure that eventually collapses.
That is exactly right. The blueprint is non-negotiable, but even if you have the perfect blueprint, the entire team still has to build the structure together.
Okay, maybe what?
This brings us to the second half of the political anchor, unity of effort. We are talking about the absolute necessity of coordination across government agencies, the armed forces, Central Armed Police Forces, or CAPFs, local police, intelligence, and civilian administration.
Wow, that is a lot of moving parts. The equation here is straightforward, right? Fragmentation leads to failure. Coordination leads to effectiveness.
Exactly.
But the mechanics of getting all those different alphabet soup agencies to work together must be an absolute nightmare.
It is incredibly complex. You are dealing with different agencies that possess totally different cultures, separate budgets, and fiercely guarded leadership structures.
Turf wars, basically.
Massive turf wars. If the central intelligence agencies aren't talking to the local beat police, and the local police deeply resent the armed forces stepping into their jurisdiction, you create bureaucratic cracks.
And I'm guessing the insurgents use those cracks.
They absolutely do. In an insurgency, those cracks become physical sanctuaries for the insurgents. They slip right through the gaps in communication.
So we have the political blueprint, and we have the state agencies coordinating. But here is where things get really delicate.
Right.
We aren't just talking about police and military. We have to talk about the civilian population. Let's look at diversity, integration, and domestic consensus.
This is a big one.
Because when we look back at the history of internal conflicts, the recurring historical problem is the devastating alienation of diverse ethnicities, languages, or religions within a state.
This is perhaps the most critical chain of events we will discuss today. Let's look at the reason this alienation happens and how it metastasizes.
Okay, walk us through it.
When a state backs discrimination with actual force, whether that is legal force or physical force, it strips marginalized people of their peaceful recourses.
Right.
If you cannot vote for change or protest for change without being suppressed, a segment of that population will inevitably turn to militancy, terrorism, and demands for separation.
They feel backed into a corner.
Exactly. And what is strategically disastrous for the state is that this internal fracturing acts like an open door.
An open door for who?
For foreign forces. Foreign forces inimical to the country's interests are always waiting in the wings to step in, fund, and exploit those internal fractures.
Right. They use your own domestic issues as a proxy weapon against you.
Yeah.
And that makes a lot of sense. So the corrective principle here is the politics of inclusivity.
Yes.
It's the hard-won realization that true, lasting integration, a diverse populace, is never, ever achieved through violence.
Never. True integration requires accommodation and respect for identity, period.
So the future application for any state dealing with internal diversity is that they must build domestic political consensus before making major decisions.
That's exactly right. Whether the state is seeking a peaceful political solution or, in extreme circumstances, authorizing the use of force, it needs the broad backing of the populace to sustain that effort.
Makes sense.
Let's map out the cause and effect chain for the listener. It is a very specific flow. Alienation leads to grievance, grievance leads to mobilization, and mobilization leads to conflict.
Let me lock that in for you listening. Alienation leads to grievance. Grievance leads to mobilization. Mobilization leads to conflict. That mental flowchart is so vital because it forces us to look beyond the guy holding the weapon and look at root cause resolution.
Exactly.
If you just arrest the guy with the weapon, you haven't solved the fact that 10 more people are currently moving from grievance to mobilization. We have to look at the economic gaps, the identity concerns, the governance failures, and the development deficits.
What is fascinating and, often tragic is that states frequently try to solve these root causes purely with money.
Oh, like throwing cash at the problem.
Right. They pour funds into a restive region, building new roads, bridges, and infrastructure. But infrastructure development completely fails if the structural inequalities remain in place.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you can build a multi-million-dollar brand new highway, but if the people driving on it are still treated as second-class citizens, the insurgency will simply use that new highway to move their operatives.
So the environment gets nicer, but the anger is still exactly the same.
Exactly. Governance has to change, not just the scenery. Look again at the brutal violence in Sri Lanka. Amidst all the high-level geopolitical chess and armed conflict, the common Tamil person on the street simply wanted the structural violence to end so they could live, work, and raise their families peacefully.
So the core principle to remember here is this. Security reduces violence, but governance removes causes.
Yes.
The military can apply a tourniquet to pause the bleeding, but only good, equitable governance can actually heal the wound.
Beautifully stated.
Yeah.
And that brings up a massive challenge for the state.
Exactly. So if governance is the only way to actually heal the wound, that puts the state in a really precarious position. You've paused the bleeding with the military, but how on earth do you convince a population that just saw you as an occupying force to suddenly trust you as a legitimate government?
It's the ultimate test.
Let's dive into the transition from conflict to normalcy, starting with Section 2, balancing security and rights.
This is where many states stumble. The historical problem is that extraordinary security legislation often persists way beyond the active insurgency phases.
Right.
During a crisis, a state will pass emergency laws that emphasize absolute control over civilian consent, but they don't let those laws go when the violence ebbs.
And what's the mechanism behind that? I mean, why wouldn't a government just repeal the emergency laws the moment the shooting stops? It would make everyone happier.
Because the transition from a security-dominated administration back to civilian governance is incredibly difficult and bureaucratic.
How so?
Well, when you have had military forces maintaining order for 5, 10, or 20 years, the local civilian institutions, the courts, the municipal councils, the local police, they atrophy.
Oh, they just forget how to do their jobs.
They forget how to function under pressure. So the state relies on the military and those extraordinary security laws as a crutch. It just feels safer to keep the military in charge.
But the corrective principle has to be finding the balance between operational necessity and civil liberties. You have to maintain public trust because legitimacy is a strategic asset.
It is the most important asset.
Right. If the people don't view the state as legitimate, the insurgents will always have a recruiting pool.
Yes. So the future application requires meticulously planned post-conflict normalization.
Give us an example of what that looks like.
A great example of this is how India has managed the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, or AFSPA. They have gradually withdrawn AFPA from areas that have begun to show a semblance of normalcy.
Okay.
By voluntarily giving up those extraordinary emergency powers, the state sends a powerful, tangible signal to the population. We trust you.
Wait, I want to push back on this because it sounds good in theory, but on the ground, isn't it incredibly risky to pull back security forces too soon?
It is a risk, yes.
Like, if you lift the emergency laws, couldn't the insurgents just use that newly created breathing room to regroup, rearm, and strike again?
That is the eternal tightrope walk of counterinsurgency. Yes, there is an absolute tactical risk. An insurgent cell might slip through.
Right.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, holding on to emergency powers too long destroys the very legitimacy needed for lasting peace.
So you're causing more harm in the long run.
Exactly. If you treat a pacified population like they are still enemy combatants, subjecting them to endless checkpoints and searches when the violence is dropped, you will eventually push them back into the arms of the insurgents. You are accepting a small tactical risk to secure a massive strategic victory.
That reframing makes total sense. You are trading short-term control for long-term trust.
Exactly.
And part of building that long-term trust involves rehabilitation and reintegration. We are talking about the incredibly thorny process of bringing former militants back into democratic politics.
Thorny is an understatement. This process faces massive, visceral resistance from multiple sides.
I can imagine.
You have hardliners within the insurgency who view any compromise as treason, and you have victims of the violent citizens who have lost loved ones, rightfully demanding justice and accountability from the state.
Right, it's a bitter pill to swallow to see a former militant running for local office.
It is. But historically, we have seen that it is a necessary mechanism for lasting peace. The Mizo National Front is a textbook example here.
Oh, right.
They transitioned successfully from a violent armed insurgency deep in the jungles into a mainstream participating electoral political party.
To give you a clear framework for how this works, there is a specific transition model. It goes like this. You start as a combatant, then comes the surrender.
Yes.
That is followed by rehabilitation, and finally, entry into the political or social mainstream.
That's the flow.
Combatant, surrender, rehabilitation, mainstream.
It is a highly delicate pipeline. If the rehabilitation phase fails, like if the state doesn't provide them with job training, security, or a political voice, they drop out of the pipeline and go right back to the forest.
But if managed correctly, it is the only way to truly empty the forest of fighters permanently.
That's the goal.
What if the fighters aren't in the forest anymore? What if the battlefield has completely shifted to the screens in our pockets?
Ah, yes.
This brings us to a massive evolution in conflict studies, New Age mobilization. This is the future threat environment. Historically, insurgencies took years to build a base. Today, the historical problem we are seeing is spontaneous, democratically channeled protests rapidly escalating into incredibly violent trajectories.
Or even leading to total regime change in a matter of weeks.
Exactly.
The reason for this drastic shift is profound. Social media acts as an accelerant. It accelerates narrative battles and allows for rapid, almost instant mobilization.
Like overnight.
Yes. In the past, organizing a protest of 10,000 people required months of printing flyers, secret meetings, and physical logistics. Today, it takes a single viral video. This turns localized social frustration into mass, collective violence almost instantly. And it becomes a severe national security risk if those movements are observed and exploited by outside powers, waiting in the wings to destabilize the state.
And to be clear to you listening, we are looking at this purely through a mechanical lens. We aren't taking sides on the politics of any of these movements, but we have to acknowledge the sheer volume of examples we've seen recently.
There are many.
Demands for Gorkhaland, Eastern Nagaland, statehood for Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, linguistic subnationalism movements, massive farmer protests, and even complete regime changes in the immediate neighborhood.
In places like Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Nepal.
Right. The mechanics are staggering. A street protest over a localized economic issue can become a revolutionary movement that topples a government before the state even realizes what is happening.
Exactly. It means the state's reaction time has to be faster, and its governance has to be far more responsive.
You can't just wait it out.
No, you can no longer rely on a slow, lumbering bureaucracy to address a grievance. If you mishandle a political or governance issue today, a hashtag can turn into a regime change before the traditional bureaucratic committees even have time to draft their first response.
Wow. So we've discussed how these movements mobilize, whether in the jungle or on social media. Now let's look at how the state fights back. This is Section 3, Starving the Beast.
My favorite topic.
How does a state dismantle an opponent's capabilities before a single kinetic shot is even fired? You do it by cutting off their lifeblood, their money, and their global support.
Let's start with financial network disruption. The chain of survival for any armed group is absolute, and it works like this. Money leads to recruitment. Recruitment leads to weapons. Weapons lead to operations.
Let me echo that for the listener. Money to recruitment to weapons to operations.
Therefore, the corrective principle is basically mathematical. Financial denial equals capability reduction.
Simple as that.
If they cannot pay their cadres, feed their fighters, or buy ammunition, the insurgency starves. It is exactly like treating a tumor.
Okay, how so?
You don't just surgically attack the mass of the tumor, you aggressively cut off the vascular system that is feeding it blood. Money is the vascular system of an insurgency.
Right.
We saw this historically when Sri Lanka successfully choked insurgent funds during Elam War 4. We've also seen India take deliberate, incredibly incisive steps to unearth illegal funds.
I want to break down the how here, because financial disruption isn't just like a guy at a computer freezing a local checking account.
No, definitely not.
How does a state actually choke out an insurgency's money when that money is hidden globally?
It requires massive integrated international coordination. You have to map out the insurgency's front companies, charities or businesses operating in Western countries that are secretly funneling money back home.
Like money laundering.
Yes. You have to crack down on diaspora funding, where sympathizers abroad send money. You have to intercept illegal taxes the insurgents extort from local businesses, and you have to dismantle the drug smuggling and counterfeiting networks they use to wash their cash.
Wow.
It requires incredibly sharp internal financial intelligence, seamlessly sharing data with international banking regulators.
So once you start starving them financially, cutting off the blood supply, you have to shape the physical battlefield for your security forces. You outlined 6 non-negotiable pillars for creating an effective operational environment. Let's walk through these, because if a state fails at these, they're sending their troops into a meat grinder.
Absolutely.
Killer number 1, a clear mandate.
We touched on clarity of aim earlier, but at the tactical level, a clear mandate means avoiding what we call creeping enhancements.
What's a creeping enhancement?
It's when you tell a military force to secure a village,
Right.
and then a week later you tell them to administer the district, and then a month later you tell them to rebuild the local economy and run the schools.
Oh, you just keep adding jobs.
Yes, that continually overstretches the forces, blurs their operational focus, and basically guarantees failure.
Got it. Pillar 2, freedom of execution.
Once the mandate is set and the blueprint is clear, the politicians must step back. The security forces need a free hand and no micromanagement when dealing with the violent perpetrators of the insurgency.
Wait, let me stop you on Pillar 3, which is the legal framework. If you give the military absolute freedom of execution, don't you also need a legal framework to ensure they don't go rogue? How do these 2 pillars interact?
It is a delicate balance. The legal framework pillar isn't about giving troops a blank check to commit crimes.
Right.
It's about protecting soldiers from frivolous, weaponized legal cases intended by insurgent sympathizers to paralyze operations.
Oh, they use lawsuits as a weapon.
Exactly. This ties directly back to our discussion on AFSPA. Soldiers operating and the principle here is that the state should only remove those legal protections when complete peace and a political solution are actually achieved, not just promised by the insurgents.
Understood. Pillar 4 is resources, manpower, weapons, and ammo.
And history shows us the devastating danger of under-resourcing an operation. When the Indian peacekeeping force, the IPKF, was deployed, they found themselves at a significant historical disadvantage against the LTTE.
Really? Why?
Precisely because of initial deficits in intelligence, specific logistical resources, and a misunderstanding of the incredibly complex nature of the environment they were thrust into. You cannot send troops in blind and under-equipped and expect strategic success.
Which perfectly sets up Pillar 5, technology.
Technology is the ultimate force multiplier. We are seeing technology entirely transform the security space. A small unit backed by drones and cyber intelligence can dominate an area that used to require an entire battalion.
And finally, Pillar 6, administrative support.
The military cannot exist in a vacuum. They need the absolute backing of local political and administrative elements. The local civil servants, the magistrates, the municipal workers, they all have to support the military's logistical needs to execute tasks efficiently.
So those 6 pillars shape the ground game. But as we established for the financial disruption, modern conflicts aren't just fought on the ground. They are fought globally.
Very true.
Let's look at diplomatic lessons in information warfare.
This raises a fascinating and difficult question. How do you defeat an enemy whose top leaders are living comfortably in penthouses in a foreign capital thousands of miles away from the jungle?
Yeah, how do you touch them?
You need diplomatic isolation.
And the mechanism for that is sustained aggressive lobbying.
Exactly. The state must launch a diplomatic campaign to erode the insurgents' political backing, their financial support, and their foreign sanctuaries.
Make them toxic, basically.
Yes. You have to convince foreign governments to label the group a terrorist organization, which allows international law enforcement to seize their assets. Sri Lanka executed this very effectively by taking measures to ensure the LTTE lost its international credibility and, crucially, its foreign bases of operation and supply lines.
And tied directly to that diplomatic effort is information warfare. We are looking at the information superiority model. The historical problem here is that states often think actions speak louder than words.
They do.
They think if they just do the right thing on the ground, the world will see it. But the reason that fails is that insurgents are often master propagandists.
Absolutely masterful. The insurgents will take a video of a legitimate military operation, edit it out of context, and broadcast it globally to paint the state as a brutal aggressor.
Which ruins the state's reputation.
Exactly. This invites international sanctions and emboldens domestic recruits. So the corrective principle is that narrative building and perception management are just as critical as kinetic operations.
Like PR for the military.
Exactly. In the source material, Operation Sindoor is mentioned as a textbook validation of this. It demonstrated how pushing a sophisticated, proactive counter-narrative against insurgent media operations is just as critical as pushing troops into a valley.
Right.
If you lose the narrative, you lose the war, even if you win every single firefight.
Okay, we have shaped the environment, we've choked the finances, locked down the diplomatic channels, won the narrative war, and built the 6 pillars on the ground. Now we enter the most visceral part of our deep dive. Section 4, the tip of the spear.
The actual kinetic operations?
Exactly. How have the execution of these conflicts evolved?
It all starts with intelligence dominance. Conducting military operations without intelligence is just sending armed men to walk blindly into the dark.
Which is terrifying.
It is. The cycle we use to illuminate that darkness is collection to fusion to analysis to action.
Collection, fusion, analysis, action. And if you execute that cycle perfectly, you achieve what we call the advantage model. Information advantage leads to decision advantage, which leads to operational advantage.
That's the progression.
But let's look at the mechanics of this. Where does this cycle usually break down?
The critical friction point is almost always fusion.
Fusion. Why?
The historical problem is that central intelligence agencies, state police forces, local beat cops, and military intelligence all collect massive amounts of data. But they hoard it.
Because knowledge is power, and bureaucracies protect their power.
Exactly right. They don't share it. The central agency doesn't trust the local police, and the military thinks they don't need the central agency.
That's a mess.
But flawless execution absolutely requires seamless intelligence sharing across all those verticals. The operator kicking down the door needs the precise, actionable data that comes from fusing a local cop's tip with a military satellite intercept.
Which brings us to what you actually do with that perfectly fused data.
Yeah.
The leadership targeting concept. This is fascinating. The historical problem is that states often treat insurgent groups like amorphous blobs, just a faceless, infinite swarm of fighters.
And treating them like a swarm is a massive strategic mistake.
Why does it fail?
The reason it fails is that insurgencies are highly structured, hierarchical organizations. Leadership matters immensely. The top leaders provide direction, command and control, ideological motivation, and vital global network connections for funding.
So the corrective principle is breaking the organizational system by neutralizing the head, leading to total group collapse.
Yes.
I like to think of this like the architecture of an ancient stone archway. If you treat the group like a swarm, you are just taking out random bricks on the side. The archway still stands.
Right.
But if you identify and remove the keystone at the very top, the entire structure shatters under its own weight.
That is a perfect analogy. And modern history provides profound examples of this keystone targeting. The neutralization of Lupalai Prabhakaran in Sri Lanka effectively ended the LTTE as a fighting force.
Wow, just one guy.
Well, the apex leader. We saw the massive systemic impact of removing Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri from al-Qaeda, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi from ISIS, Yahya Sinwar from Hamas, and Hassan Nasrallah from Hezbollah. Removing the apex leadership doesn't just kill a man, it shatters the command, control, and psychological architecture of the entire movement.
So once you have the fused intelligence on where the keystone leadership is hiding, how do you actually get them? You don't send a whole division of tanks anymore, right? We are seeing a massive tactical shift towards small team operations.
Yes, because modern high-value targeting requires absolute stealth, speed, precision, and flexibility.
Like a scalpel instead of a hammer.
Exactly. You want to get in, strike, and get out before the enemy even knows what happened. But we have to look at the contrasting scenarios where this applies. Small teams are highly effective in regions like Jammu and Kashmir.
Why there specifically?
In that specific environment, terrorists typically operate in small, isolated groups of 2 to 6 individuals. So specialized, highly trained forces like Gataks or special forces can track them, isolate them, and neutralize them effectively.
But you contrast that with left-wing extremism, the Naxals. For you listening, Naxals are Maoist insurgent groups operating deep within the dense, unforgiving jungles of central and eastern India.
Right, and the Naxals operate in entirely different ways. They tend to move in much larger groups, deeply embedded in complex jungle terrain.
So a small team wouldn't work?
No, if you send an isolated 5-man special forces team in there to hunt them, that small team is highly vulnerable to being surrounded, ambushed, and heavily outnumbered.
That's a nightmare scenario.
It is. In those environments, small teams are best used purely for unseen surveillance, unless the state has a massive rapid response backup force and helicopters ready to build up the numbers instantly.
The future application of this kinetic evolution is deep penetration strikes. We saw the Sri Lankan army practice this to devastating effect against LTTE leadership, and Indian special forces undertake these currently. Small teams slipping quietly miles behind enemy lines, taking out high-value targets and extracting.
And what makes those deep penetration strikes possible without it being a suicide mission? Technology transformation.
Oh, okay.
The foundational principle here is that technology multiplies human capability. A small team today isn't just 5 guys with rifles.
How are they then?
They're backed by low Earth orbit satellites, unmanned aerial vehicles providing real-time overhead video, cyber capabilities blinding the enemy's sensors, and communication intelligence interceptors listening to the enemy's radios.
That's insane.
A 5-man team today has more situational awareness than an entire army division would have had 30 years ago.
It's incredible. The lethality is just off the charts. But, and here is where we have to pause and pivot to the most crucial part of this entire discussion. Section 5, the human element.
This is the turning point.
Tech and small teams are highly lethal, but pure lethality completely backfires if it turns the population against you. If you remember nothing else from this deep dive, remember this: the population is the ultimate center of gravity. Let's talk about clean operations and population support.
The historical problem we face here is as old as war itself. Excessive force alienates the very citizens the state is supposedly trying to protect.
Give me a real-world example of how that happens.
Let me give you a mechanical example. If a state uses heavy artillery to neutralize 2 insurgent snipers hiding in a village, and they destroy 10 civilian homes and kill innocent bystanders in the process, they didn't just kill 2 insurgents.
They created a whole new problem.
They just created 50 brand new insurgents out of the grieving families.
So the corrective principle has to be strictly calibrated force.
Yes, sparing common citizens, women, and children at all costs. Minimum collateral damage must be the operational standard.
Because minimizing damage ensures trust.
Exactly, and trust generates local intelligence. Civilians start calling the police to report where the insurgents are hiding, and that local intelligence leads to long-term peace.
And this requires balancing human rights with mission execution. The Indian Army, for instance, has a strong institutional human rights record, but it is always a razor's-edge balance in the heat of a firefight.
It's never easy.
It is worth noting, just as a historical contrast, that in Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan Armed Forces' ultimate success against the LTTE prioritized absolute mission execution to finally break the decades-long stalemate. It highlights the brutal, complex, and often grim realities of ending deeply entrenched conflicts.
It does. To actively build trust and avoid those grim scenarios, modern forces use the WHAM concept, winning hearts and minds.
Walk us through how WHAM actually functions on the ground.
It is a fundamentally human approach. It combines development support, like the military building critical local infrastructure, providing freshwater facilities, and confidence-building measures, like running free medical and veterinary camps.
So they're acting like humanitarian workers.
Yes, the goal is to actively reduce the opponent's support base. If the army is building your child's school and treating your sick parent, the insurgents' propaganda narrative that the state is an evil occupier simply falls apart.
You're fighting their narrative with tangible goodwill. And all of this, the incredible restraint required to not use heavy weapons, The WAM projects, the precise, dangerous small team operations, it all relies heavily on the psychological state of the soldiers themselves. Let's look at morale and training. We have another vital cycle for you to remember. Capability leads to success, which leads to morale.
People often think morale is just an abstract feeling, generated by giving good speeches or playing patriotic music.
Right, like a locker room speech.
It isn't. High morale is engineered. It is scientifically engineered through rigorous, punishing training, providing the absolute best superior equipment, and achieving periodic, undeniable operational successes that establish clear psychological ascendancy over the terrorists.
So it's about competence, not just hype.
Exactly. When soldiers know in their bones that they are better trained and better equipped than the enemy, and they see it proven repeatedly in the field, morale takes care of itself.
Okay, we are entering the final major section before our synthesis. Section 6, Future Preparedness. Having looked at the past and the present, what structures must states build right now to survive the volatile conflicts of tomorrow? Let's talk about the OOAC force, the out-of-area contingency force.
The historical problem we face moving into the future is the bureaucratic instinct to employ conventional military formations. Troops trained to fight massive, slow border wars with tanks and artillery for entirely different operational roles.
Like what?
States try to use them for rapid overseas interventions, hostage rescues, or rapid regional stabilization. It almost always proves counterproductive.
And the reason states do this is panic, right?
Yeah.
The geopolitical neighborhood is incredibly volatile. Fragile political setups in neighboring regions can collapse literally overnight.
Yes.
You might have thousands of your own citizens trapped in a collapsing neighboring state, requiring a rapid, specialized response to evacuate them and protect national interests.
So the future application, the necessary architectural structure, is a dedicated out-of-area contingency force. India, for example, needs a dedicated division-size rapid action force built specifically for this.
What does that actually look like on paper? Why is it different from a normal Army division?
It requires an entirely different operational DNA to work. It needs a consistent, pre-approved national policy. It needs the Headquarters Integrated Defense Staff, or HQIDS, to have direct ownership of the plans, so there is no interagency bickering during a crisis.
No turf wars when time is running out.
Right. It requires apex-level oversight and deep daily joint planning between all military services and civilian agencies. You need augmented lift capabilities, specialized sea, air, and land transport to move an entire division instantly across borders.
Wow.
And crucially, unlike a conventional fighting force, this force needs embedded diplomatic, legal, and media advisory teams.
Wait, so they're bringing their own lawyers and PR teams into the combat zone?
Exactly, because when you cross a border to stabilize a region, the international fallout begins the second boots hit the ground. You need a media team broadcasting your narrative, diplomats talking to the UN, and legal teams ensuring compliance, all happening in real time alongside the military operation.
That is a massive, multi-dimensional undertaking, which perfectly aligns with the final master framework we want to leave the listener with today. We are going to synthesize everything we've talked about into a 5-layer, multi-dimensional model.
This is the ultimate checklist.
If you are analyzing any complex crisis, whether on the news or in a boardroom, run it through these 5 layers. Number 1, the political layer. Number 2, the diplomatic layer. Number 3, the security layer. Number 4, the information layer. Number 5, the development layer.
If a government drafts a strategy that ignores even one of those layers, the strategy is doomed to fail. You cannot shoot your way out of a political problem. You cannot develop your way out of an active security threat. And you cannot win if you lose the information war. All 5 must be engaged simultaneously.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We are going to transition into the audio revision in Section 7. We want to lock in the key facts, memory hooks, and concepts we've covered over the last hour.
Let's do it.
Let's put this to the test. If we were drafting a comprehensive manual for a newly appointed national security director, how would we synthesize the 5 core lessons we discussed today?
I would lay out the 5 frameworks like this. For the first lesson, on past security operations. The core takeaway from 70 years of multidimensional conflict is that military effort completely dissipates without clear political aims.
Right.
The absolute necessity is unity of effort across all agencies. Fragmentation is failure. Coordination is effectiveness. The bedrock of security is a clear mandate.
Listen to the political and diplomatic dimensions.
We must understand that internal alienation invites external exploitation. True integration can never be achieved through state violence. Politics must be inclusive, and simultaneously, diplomacy must mercilessly choke external insurgent support. Just as Sri Lanka isolated the LTTE, legitimacy and narrative dominance are just as vital as capturing physical territory.
Lesson 3. The role of technology and intelligence.
We are shifting from mass armies to precision warfare. The intelligence cycle collection, fusion, analysis, and action is everything. Technology, from deep penetration strikes to UAV surveillance, is the ultimate force multiplier, but it is useless without seamless interagency fusion. Fused information advantage creates decision advantage, which creates operational advantage.
Lesson 4. The population-centric approach.
The inescapable truth that excessive force breeds new insurgents. Security forces must balance human rights, development, and calibrated force through the HAM concept, winning hearts and minds. You must spare civilians to build trust, because the military can only provide security. Governance must remove the root causes. The population is always the ultimate center of gravity.
And finally, Lesson 5. Future preparedness.
Acknowledging neighborhood volatility and the staggering speed of new-age social media mobilization, conventional forces will struggle with these hybrid crises. Therefore, states must build specialized out-of-area contingency forces featuring joint planning, heavy lift capabilities, and embedded legal and media teams. Adaptability will define future success.
Brilliant. Now let's cement the critical mental flowcharts we established. If you remember nothing else from this deep dive, remember these sequences. First, how conflict starts. Alienation leads to grievance. Grievance leads to mobilization. Mobilization leads to conflict. Second, how insurgents survive. Money leads to recruitment. Recruitment leads to weapons. Weapons lead to operations.
Starve the beast.
Third, how to transition out of conflict. Combatant to surrender to rehabilitation to the mainstream.
The only way out.
And finally, the intelligence edge. Information advantage to decision advantage to operational advantage.
Those flowcharts are the undeniable DNA of conflict studies.
As we wrap up today, I want to sincerely thank you for acting as our master teacher. We've seen how true strategic success requires a perfectly synchronized machinery that stretches from the ballot box to the bank accounts to the diplomatic halls, all the way to the battlefield.
It has been a privilege to unpack this complex machinery with you. But as we conclude, I want to leave the listener with one final, very provocative reflection drawn directly from our source material regarding the Indo-Sri Lanka Peace Accord.
Let's bring it full circle.
We started by talking about rejecting victory. The historical reality of the Indo-Sri Lanka Peace Accord is that it was the best bargain possible for the Sri Lankan Tamils at the time. It offered them practically everything they had been fighting for: recognizing their historical habitation, ensuring their physical safety, uniting their provinces. It gave them everything short of total independent separation, which they called Elam.
But they said no.
But the LTTE, driven by an intransigent leadership and a total lack of long-term vision, refused to accept it. They turned violently on their very benefactors, and because of that absolute refusal to compromise, they were ultimately entirely vanquished.
They lost it all.
And in their violent destruction, the LTTE dragged down and destroyed all the geopolitical gains that had been so painstakingly secured for the Tamil community.
They had the win in their hands, but the absolute refusal to compromise cost them everything. It is a staggering tragedy. Which brings us to the final question we want you to mull over as you go about your day. Think about this in terms of global geopolitics, but also in your own life, your own negotiations, and your own organizations.
Yeah.
When fighting for a cause, at what point does the absolute refusal to compromise transform you into the very instrument of your own cause's destruction?
A haunting question, but a strictly necessary one if we want to understand the true cost of conflict.
Take these strategic frameworks, the flowcharts, and these hard-won lessons into your own lives, your leadership, and your organizations. Until next time, keep analyzing the systems around you.